The darkness still clings to the village of Oakhaven. It is long before the sun even considers waking. But inside a small, smoke-filled cottage, Agnes is already stirring, her breath mists in the cold air. There are no gentle awakenings here, no leisurely stretching. The day demands action from its very first gasp. And the very first, most vital task, that of course is bread. Without it, her family will not have the strength to face the long, laborious hours that lie ahead. This is the rhythm of life itself, a rhythm set by the need for this most basic food. The day begins with bread, always. Agnes moves quietly, her bare feet cold on the packed earth floor. She carefully tends to the embers in the hearth. Last night's fire is almost dead. She coaxes it back to life with precious twigs and dried bracken. Fuel is not abundant. Every piece is gathered with effort. Soon, a small flame flickers, casting dancing shadows on the rough wattle and daub walls. Her husband, Thomas, and their 2 young children are still huddled under thin woolen blankets, lost in whatever sleep they can find. The sounds of the waking fire, the crackle and pop, are the first sounds of this new medieval day, a promise of warmth and, more importantly, of sustenance. Next, she turns to the dough. It's a living thing, this mixture of coarse flour, water, and a piece of leaven saved from yesterday's baking. This mother dough is a crucial inheritance passed from bake to bake. The flour is rough, probably a mix of rye and perhaps some wheat known as maslin. It's certainly not the fine white sort you might imagine. Agnes kneads it with strong, practiced hands. Her muscles ache, even this early. There is no romance in this. This is work, pure and simple, the repetitive, essential labor that underpins their entire existence. It's about survival, not culinary delight. Soon the misshapen lumps of dough will be ready. Some families in Oakhaven might share a communal village oven, a source of warmth and gossip. But Agnes, like many, might bake her loaves directly in the hot ashes of her hearth or on a flat stone placed over the fire. The wait is anxious. Will it rise? Will it burn? This first bake of the day is everything. It is breakfast. It is lunch packed for the fields. It is the energy that will see them through until the thin evening meal. This humble loaf is the cornerstone of their day, every single day. Now, let's be clear. The bread Agnes is baking isn't some fancy artisan sourdough you'd queue for on a Saturday morning. This is no luxury item. This is survival, plain and simple. For the vast majority of people in medieval England, bread was not just part of their diet, it was their diet. Historians estimate that an ordinary peasant might eat a staggering 2 to 3 pounds of bread a day. Yes, you heard that right, pounds of it. It was the fuel that powered medieval society, the carbohydrate kick that got them through back-breaking work in the fields from sunrise to sunset. Imagine the sheer lack of variety on a peasant's table. Meat was a rare treat. Perhaps a bit of bacon if they were lucky enough to own a pig, or poached rabbit if they dared risk the forest laws. Vegetables were seasonal, often from their own small garden plots. Onions, cabbages, peas. Fruit, too, was a fleeting pleasure, but bread was the constant. It was there, day in, day out, providing the bulk of their calories. It was the food that filled their bellies and kept starvation usually at bay. Without it, life would quite literally grind to a halt. Think about the monotony. Breakfast bread. Dinner, meaning the midday meal bread, perhaps with a thin pottage or some cheese if available. Supper, more bread, maybe dipped in ale. Sometimes the bread itself served as the plate. A thick slice, called a trencher, would have other meagre foodstuffs placed upon it. After the meal, the gravy-soaked trencher might be eaten by the diner, given to the dogs, or if you were very poor, it might be your only solid food. It's a world away from our food-obsessed culture, isn't it? Yet, despite its coarseness and the repetitive nature of eating it, bread offered a fundamental comfort. A full stomach, even one filled with heavy, dark bread, was a blessing. The alternative, an empty stomach, was a constant gnawing fear. Bread wasn't just calories, it was security. It was the unglamorous, unsung hero of their daily lives, the silent provider that asked for nothing but offered the very essence of life itself. Its presence meant survival, its absence a terrifying void. Of course, not all medieval bread was created equal. Oh no, the type of loaf you ate spoke volumes about who you were, your place in the rigid social hierarchy. It was a clear, edible marker of status. Agnes and her family, peasants at the bottom of the social ladder, would have eaten the roughest, darkest bread. This was often maslin bread, a heavy, dense loaf made from a mixture of wheat and rye. Sometimes in harder times it might be made from barley, oats, or even peas and beans. It was filling certainly, but hardly a gourmet experience. Move a little up the social scale, perhaps to an artisan in a town or a prosperous yeoman farmer. Their bread would likely be a bit better. It might still be made from wholemeal flour, but perhaps with more wheat than rye, and with some of the coarsest brands sifted out. It would be lighter in colour and texture than the peasant's loaf. They could afford slightly better quality grain, and perhaps even the services of a professional baker who had access to a more efficient oven. It was an improvement, a small step up, but still a world away from what the truly wealthy were eating. And at the very top, now we're talking. The nobility, the clergy, the wealthy merchants. They dined on manchet bread. This was the medieval equivalent of the finest white sliced loaf, only infinitely more exclusive. Manchet was made from the purest wheat flour, sifted multiple times to remove every speck of bran. The result was a light, airy, almost cake-like bread. It was pale, delicate, and a powerful symbol of their wealth and refinement. It showed they could afford not just the best grain, but also the labor required to produce such a pristine product. So, you see, your daily bread was a constant reminder of your station in life. The color, the texture, the very grain it was made from, all these things broadcast your social standing to the world. Dark and coarse for the laboring poor, signifying their connection to the earth and their toil. White and fine for the privileged few, a mark of their leisure and their distance from manual work. In medieval England, you truly were what you ate, and that story began quite literally with the loaf on your table. The journey of bread from a waving field of golden grain to a finished loaf on the table was a long and arduous one. It was a process steeped in hard physical labour, long before Agnes even got her hands on the flour. First, the harvest itself. Men, women, and even children would toil under the hot sun, reaping the wheat rye or barley with sickles. Then came the threshing, beating the harvested stalks with flails to separate the precious grains from the chaff. Every single grain was won through sweat and effort, a testament to human endurance. Once harvested and threshed, the grain faced its next crucial transformation, milling. This was the process of grinding the grains into flour. Most villages would have a mill powered by water or wind. These were often owned by the local lord of the manor, and peasants would be required to take their grain there and pay a portion of it, known as multure, for the privilege of having it ground. Millers themselves had a rather notorious reputation. Chaucer's miller in the Canterbury Tales is a master hand at stealing grain, reflecting a common suspicion that millers often took more than their fair share. For those without access or wanting to avoid the fees, laborious hand querns were used at home. The flour that emerged from these medieval mills was a world away from the smooth, consistent product we buy in bags today. It was coarse, unevenly ground, and crucially often full of impurities. The millstones themselves, massive circular stones that ground the grain, would shed tiny particles of rock with every rotation. This stone dust, along with other bits of grit, dirt, and even insect fragments, became an unavoidable ingredient in the resulting flour. Sifting could remove some of the larger pieces of bran, but the fine grit remained, a hidden menace within every sack. Then came the baking. While some, like Agnes, baked at home in rudimentary conditions, larger villages and towns would have professional bakers. The baker's oven was often a central hub, a place of warmth and industry. Bakers, like millers, were subject to suspicion and regulation. Laws like the assize of bread and ale set strict controls on the weight, price and quality of loaves to prevent bakers from cheating customers by selling underweight bread or using substandard ingredients. The daily bread was so vital that its production was a matter of public concern and careful oversight. That stone dust we mentioned, the tiny particles flaking off the millstones, well, it didn't magically disappear when the flour was made into dough and baked into bread. Oh no, it stayed right there, an unwelcome and abrasive addition to every single mouthful. Imagine, if you will, sprinkling a fine layer of sand onto your toast every morning. That's essentially what medieval people were consuming with their daily bread. It was an invisible ingredient, but one with very visible and painful consequences for their health. The effect of this gritty bread on medieval teeth was, quite frankly, devastating. Chewing coarse, stone-laced bread day after day, year after year, acted like sandpaper on tooth enamel. Teeth became progressively worn down, flattened and chipped. This wasn't just an issue for the elderly. Even young adults often showed signs of severe dental attrition. And once the protective enamel was gone, the softer dentine underneath was exposed, leading to sensitivity decay and eventually excruciating toothaches and abscesses. Dental hygiene as we know it was non-existent, so there was little to combat the relentless wear and tear. Archaeological evidence from medieval cemeteries paints a very clear and rather grim picture. Skeletal remains frequently show teeth worn down almost to the gum line. Evidence of dental abscesses, infections that could sometimes even be fatal, is also common. Pain must have been a constant companion for many. A throbbing toothache with no prospect of effective relief beyond perhaps a herbal poultice or a risky extraction by a local barber surgeon was a harsh reality of life. It's a stark reminder of the hidden hardships contained within something as seemingly simple as a loaf of bread. This wasn't a matter of choice, of course. People didn't knowingly add grit to their bread. It was an unavoidable consequence of the available technology for grinding grain. The millstones, whether in a large watermill or a small hand quern, were made of stone, and stone wears down. This relentless, gritty reality was part of the price they paid for their daily sustenance. Every bite of that essential bread carried with it a hidden cost, etched onto their very bones and teeth, a silent testament to the harshness of their daily lives. Medieval people had their own very distinct ideas about food, health, and the workings of the human body. These beliefs were largely based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Good health, they thought, depended on these humours being in perfect balance. Food played a crucial role in maintaining this balance, as different foods were believed to possess different qualities: hot, cold, moist, or dry, which could affect the humours. Bread in general was considered a good, wholesome, and balancing food. Different types of bread were believed to possess slightly different properties, aligning with this humoral theory. The finest white manchet bread made from pure wheat was considered light and easily digestible. It was therefore deemed most suitable for the delicate constitutions of the nobility, scholars, and the infirm. Darker, coarser breads made from rye or barley and containing more bran were seen as more robust and earthy. These were thought to be better suited for hard-working labourers whose bodies required more substantial grounding sustenance to endure their physical toil. It was a dietary system that reinforced the social order. Beyond its role as a staple food, bread also featured in medieval medical practices. It wasn't just for eating, it could also be a component in various remedies. For instance, bread soaked in milk or ale was often given to invalids or those recovering from illness, providing easily consumed nourishment. Poultices made from breadcrumbs mixed with herbs were applied to wounds and swellings, believed to draw out infection or reduce inflammation. So bread was seen not just as a source of energy, but also as a substance with inherent healing quality, a crumb of comfort in times of sickness. Despite the undeniable problem of grit, bread formed the absolute foundation of a diet that, when available in sufficient quantity, could sustain incredibly hard physical labor. It was the primary source of carbohydrates, providing the raw energy needed for long days in the fields or the workshop. While often monotonous and certainly not balanced by modern nutritional standards, it was the bedrock of their physical existence. It filled bellies, provided warmth from within, and gave people the strength to carry on, making it a vital, if imperfect, pillar of medieval health. The significance of bread in the medieval world stretched far beyond the merely physical. It was deeply woven into the spiritual and religious fabric of daily life. Consider the central Christian prayer, the Lord's Prayer, recited daily by millions. Give us this day our daily bread. For medieval people, these words were not just a metaphor, they were a literal plea for sustenance, a recognition that this most basic food was a gift from God, essential for life itself. This imbued bread with a profound sense of sanctity and importance. The sacred status was most powerfully expressed in the central Christian ritual, the Eucharist or Holy Communion. In this sacrament, bread, specifically an unleavened wafer, was consecrated and became, according to Catholic doctrine, the actual body of Christ. This transformation, known as transubstantiation, made bread the most sacred substance imaginable. Beyond the Eucharist wafer, many churches also had the custom of blessing ordinary loaves of bread, known as holy bread or pain bénite, which were then distributed to to the congregation. This further elevated the status of everyday bread in the popular imagination. Given this profound religious significance, it's no surprise that various rituals and customs surrounded bread in daily life. Many people would make the sign of the cross over a loaf with a knife before cutting into it, a small act of reverence. Wasting bread was considered a sin. Every crumb was precious. Children were taught from a young age to respect bread, to handle it carefully, and to be grateful for it. These small, everyday actions reinforced its sacred character and its importance as a divine provision, connecting the mundane act of eating with a deeper spiritual awareness. Superstitions and folk beliefs also grew up around bread, blending Christian piety with older traditions. For example, bread baked on Good Friday was often kept throughout the year, as it was believed to possess special protective powers. It was thought to guard against household fires, to prevent shipwreck if taken on a voyage, and even to have healing properties. Some believed that a piece of Good Friday bread could cure illnesses or protect crops. These beliefs demonstrate how deeply bread was embedded in the medieval psyche, not just as food, but as a symbol of faith, protection, and divine blessing. The constant underlying fear in medieval life was that of hunger, and the most terrifying manifestation of this was famine. When the grain harvest failed due to drought, relentless rain, blight, or the ravages of war, the supply of bread, the very staff of life, dwindled or disappeared entirely. The consequences were devastating. Without bread, the primary source of calories for most of the population, people weakened, became susceptible to disease, and ultimately faced starvation. The chronicles of the Middle Ages are punctuated by accounts of these desperate times. When famine struck, the social order itself came under immense strain. People were driven to eat things they would never normally consider: roots, bark, acorns, and sometimes tragically worse. The bonds of community could fray as desperation took hold. The absence of bread wasn't just a physical hardship. It was a psychological torment, a constant reminder of vulnerability. The sight of empty granaries and cold ovens in the bakehouses would have struck terror into the hearts of ordinary folk, for whom bread meant the difference between life and death. The price and availability of bread were, understandably, matters of intense public concern and potent political sensitivity. Sharp rises in the price of grain, and consequently bread, could, and often did, lead to civil unrest. Bread riots were not uncommon, as hungry and desperate people took to the streets to demand affordable food. Authorities from local magistrates to the Crown itself were acutely aware of this danger. They knew that ensuring a stable supply of reasonably priced bread was crucial for maintaining public order and their own authority. A hungry populace was a dangerous populace. To try and prevent such crises and to ensure fairness, governments enacted laws like the Assize of Bread and Ale. First introduced in England in the 13th century, this legislation regulated the price, weight, and quality of bread and ale in relation to the price of wheat. Bakers who sold underweight loaves or used adulterated flour faced fines. Public humiliation in the pillory, or even being dragged through the streets on a hurdle with their deficient loaf tied around their neck. This wasn't just about economic regulation, it was about a moral economy, a belief that access to this fundamental food was a right, and its provision a key responsibility of those in power. Bread's importance in the medieval economy extended beyond simply being a foodstuff to purchase. It often formed a direct part of people's earnings. For many agricultural labourers, servants and workers in various trades, their wages might be paid partly in cash and partly in kind, with bread being a common component of the latter. This system, known as truck, provided a tangible and immediate form of sustenance. Receiving a loaf of bread as part of your pay meant you'd guaranteed food for yourself and your family, at least for that day, a crucial security in an often precarious world. Charity, a cornerstone of medieval Christian society, also frequently revolved around the provision of bread. Monasteries were significant centres of charitable giving, often distributing a daily dole of bread and ale to the local poor and to travelling pilgrims. Wealthy nobles and merchants also saw it as their Christian duty to provide for the less fortunate, and almsgiving in the form of bread was a common practice, particularly on religious feast days or in their wills. This distribution of bread was a visible expression of piety and social responsibility, reinforcing community bonds. Beyond individual and monastic charity, various guilds and religious fraternities also played a role in supporting their members during times of hardship. These mutual aid societies often provided assistance, including grants of bread or flour, to members who fell ill, became impoverished, or to their widows and orphans. This created a form of social safety net, however limited, helping to cushion the impact of personal misfortune. In a world without state welfare, these communal support systems, often underpinned by the simple gift of bread, were vital for survival. For the poorest and most vulnerable members of medieval society, the elderly, the sick, the landless, a gift of bread represented far more than just a meal. It was a lifeline. It was a tangible expression of compassion from their fellow human beings or from religious institutions. In a world that was often harsh and unforgiving, a simple loaf of bread could be a moment of profound relief, a temporary reprieve from hunger, and a small but vital glimmer of hope. It was sustenance not just for the body, but also for the spirit. So as we journey back from the medieval world, it's clear that bread was far more than just a food item. It was the constant, unassuming, yet utterly indispensable background hum to the entirety of medieval existence. From the smoky, humble cottage of Agnes the peasant baker to the grand, tapestry-hung halls of the wealthiest lord, bread was always present, always essential. It was the daily companion, the familiar taste, the substance that literally held body and soul together for millions of people across centuries. In an age when meat was a luxury for many, and fish perhaps only slightly more common depending on location and season, bread was the great filler of hungry bellies. It was the reliable, affordable bulk that made meagre rations seem more substantial. It was the trencher that soaked up the juices of a thin stew, the edible plate that left no washing up, only perhaps a few more crumbs for the truly destitute. It was the first food of the morning and often the last food of the night, the alpha and omega of the medieval diet. This simple, everyday food profoundly shaped medieval society. It dictated rhythms of work, from the sowing of grain to the daily bake. It starkly reflected social divisions in its varied forms, from the peasant's dark rye to the noble's white manchet. It impacted physical health, most notably in the relentless wear of teeth from gritty flour. It was woven into the very fabric of their faith, their fears of famine, their politics of provision, and their expressions of charity, a seemingly mundane item, yet it carried immense cultural, economic, and spiritual weight. Therefore, when we conjure images of medieval times, the soaring cathedrals, the brave knights in shining armor, the powerful kings and queens, let us also remember the quiet, pervasive presence of bread. It was the true, unsung hero of the age. It didn't wield a sword or wear a crown, but it sustained the people who built the castles, tilled the fields, and prayed in the churches. It was the real staff of life, the everyday miracle that fueled a civilization, one gritty, essential, life-giving mouthful at a time.